r/AskReddit. Hey Reddit, when did your something's not right here gut feeling ever save you? I was 15 years old and my mom dropped me off at McDonald's to get breakfast while she went across the street to get Starbucks. It was a shopping mall in suburbia and we were on the way to pick up a new kitten a few hours away. Instead of walking the 100 yards to my mom, I sat outside waiting for her to pick me up. Teenagers, I guess. As I'm standing there, a guy in an old station wagon with 2 kids in the back starts talking to me. He asks me where I'm going and I say whatever town it was. He says he's going there too with his kids and asks if I want to come. I tell him no, that my mom is across the street, and he comes closer. My gut is saying something is off, so I see a random woman walk out of Starbucks and I point to her and say that's my mom right there. He freaked out and left really quick. I still remember those 2 kids in the back seat. They looked so off. I wonder to this day if they are okay. Forgot one. About 10 years ago, working security at a site about 50 miles from home. Got off shift at midnight and didn't bother to change out of uniform because I was only going to stop for gas. 2 stations in the town I was working in were open after midnight, but it slipped my mind as I drove past the first one, pulled into the other. Same brand, same gas price, same sort of dump entirely, and just didn't like something about it. Nobody else around but he clerk that I could see, but I decided to go back to the other one, topped off and headed back out of town. I get close to that station again. 3 city cop cars, 2 deputies and a state trooper are outside blocking the road with guns drawn. Turns out a city cop walked in on a robbery. Dude put a bullet in his vest, and the store owner knocked the robber out cold with a bat before the cop could recover enough to get his gun out. That would have been me, in a uniform with a nice shiny badge, but no body armor. Not me, but my mother. Saved my grandfather's life when he had a stroke in his chair in their living room. We had all started to walk around the development when my mother, after about 50-75 meters from the house, said, "I am going to go back and check on dad." I went with her, and I nearly witnessed my grandfather die. He was on the chair, conscious, but unable to move or talk, just looking at my mother with bulging eyes. She called 911 once, then twice when she felt that they were running late. Ambulance came, got him on the stretcher, but it was too wide to fit out the door. We ended up tearing the door frame off to get him out, because he was conscious. He actually remembers the ride to the hospital. He told us later that he heard the driver or someone say, "There is not a chance that this guy lives." That was when I was around 5-6 years old. He is still alive to this day, more than a decade later. At my mother's funeral, part of his speech was about how, without my mother, he would not have been able to spend time with her during her final years of life, and for that, he is eternally grateful. In 2004, on Boxing Day, not me but my mother, family trip including all cousins and extended family on my dad's side to visit the coastal south of Sri Lanka on vacation. About 20 people in all. Well planned trip. Last moment my mother didn't want to go. No reason at all. None of us could get her to explain why, but she refused to go. So we went inland on a different trip to see some other relatives. Around midday, the entire extended family now on both sides were sitting shocked in front of the television watching the very same hotel we booked being washed away live by that tsunami. To date, she still can't explain what she felt. My aunt told me a story about my dad, who greatly dislikes his sister and is an all-around a-hole 98% of the time. Calling her out of the blue one night while she was in college, she answered. He said he didn't know why, but he had this urge to call her, to make sure she was okay. She told him she was fine and thanked him for calling to check on her. She never told anyone else except me, and hopefully a therapist or 2. But she was holding the bottle of pills she was planning to commit suicide with right when he called her. 20-some years later, and she's very happy with her decision to live. It didn't save me, but saved a friend. A big group of friends and I were walking home from an event in a town we weren't used to. It was night, and hardly anyone was around. Empty streets and all that. We were walking down a sidewalk that had high fences next to it, so when you turned a corner, whatever was around it was out of sight. One of the girls fell behind, distracted by her phone, I think, and I noticed, so I started drifting behind as well to become a sort of midway point between her and the group. Soon, We were nearing where we were staying, and our group rounded a corner, then started making their way into the yard where our living quarters were. I saw a car drive past us, then turn the corner down the street the girl was still on. As soon as I saw it, I suddenly got this suspicious, awful feeling, so I stopped and went back to the corner to keep an eye on the friend. The car drove past her, stopped, did a complete U-turn, and slowly started creeping up behind alongside her. She was still on her phone and wasn't noticing a thing. I stepped out from behind the corner and started walking towards her. The car sped off quickly as soon as the driver saw me. It scares me that someone could have grabbed her and none of us would have seen a thing. It would have just been one of those cliche movie moments where you turn around and realize a member of the group is missing. To compound that potential tragedy, she'd just gotten engaged a few weeks prior. I think the fact that we had worked with some safe houses in the area that discussed human trafficking probably aided in me being on high alert, and the area we were in was known for that sort of thing. I was going to meet up with someone from Marketplace to buy a phone and the feeling hit me, so I called the woman and a man answered, trying to play off the fact he's a man, and I passed by where we were meeting at and it was dark and I heard voices in the background on the phone call. I never stopped the car and kept going. Pretty sure I saved myself from at the very least a mugging, but learned a good lesson. Always meet in a public place. Few years back I went to uni in Brussels. I would always take the train to get there. One morning I just woke up and didn't feel great at all. Keep in mind I have had a horrible flare up of Crohn's for the last weeks, but this felt different. Guess it was my gut. So instead of pushing through it like I did with Crohn's, I decided to stay home for once. This was the only day out of 2 that I ever stayed home from uni. That day the terror attack happened on the train that I usually ride to get to uni. My mom dropped my 3-year-old brother off at daycare before she had to work in the morning. When she got to work she had this terrible feeling something was wrong with him. She ended up leaving work and drove to the daycare. She found the daycare lady inside sleeping while the daycare kids, including my brother, were running around the pool. My brother never went back to that daycare again. My fiance and I had a fight. I went to bed to avoid it getting any worse. Had a gut feeling something was wrong. Ran downstairs and cut him down. He'd hung himself from our kitchen banister. Worst night of my life. He's been in therapy and is doing okay, but I haven't had the guts to mention it to my therapist yet. I drank a lot afterwards to cope with the trauma and still have underlying feelings of resentment. I love him very much and I'm glad he's better, but the fear of him attempting again, I don't think that ever goes away. I went to hospital with shortness of breath and my heart racing. They did a chest x-ray, blood test for blood clots, ECG, and a few other tests, but all came back normal. After observing me overnight everything still looked good. Oxygen saturation was perfect. My heart rate was still a bit elevated but nothing too crazy. And it seemed that it was likely leftover symptoms from a bad virus that I'd had a week or so earlier. The doctor asks me how I would feel if they sent me home, and I just had a bad feeling about it all. I told him as such and that I had no real basis for it except that I just felt off about it. He said fair enough. Let's try one more test, and if that comes back negative then we'll send you up to general medicine and see if they can track something down. That test was a VQ scan that found, despite all other tests showing no results for blood clots, I actually had a whole bunch of them in both lungs. I ended up with a diagnosis of unprovoked bilateral pulmonary embolisms and am on blood thinners for life. Super grateful both for the bad feeling and the doctor who was willing to listen to it. A few years ago, when I was 19 and studying abroad in Europe, and my friend and I decided to go to Turkey. It was our first time really traveling on our own without a group, and we decided to walk around the square outside of the Blue Mosque. We felt very safe during the day and decided to see the city at night with the lights. As we were in the square, we were hounded by typical store owners trying to sell us something. Finally, most went away, and as we were going back to our hotel, a younger guy approached us. He said he had a shop on the corner, which he pointed to, with lots of souvenirs including carpets. I grew up with a lot of handmade, woven carpets from my parents' travels to the Middle East and Asia. I decided it would be a nice gift, so we follow him. When we get to what we thought was his shop, we stopped. We started to walk in and he said, "Not that one, the one around the corner." We poke our head around and sure enough see a store, only selling carpets. I started to get a slightly strange feeling but nothing overwhelming, so we followed him as we could see the store. When we walked in, about 13-15 other men were in the shop. They were pointing out carpets and showing us around and I started to get really uncomfortable. My friend seemed completely at ease, so we followed the group around the bend to the other part of the store. In Turkey, it is common to be offered tea, so that part is not particularly odd, but the men, who were now circling us, were insistent that we have tea with them in the basement. I kept saying no but they were leading us towards steps, completely surround us. We got to the steps and my friend started walking down. My body began to sweat, my heart went crazy, and I never had such an overwhelming fear. I kept trying to think of how we could overpower these men. I grabbed my phone, stopped in my tracks, and gasped, "Friend's name, we need to go right now." My mom just texted me asking why we aren't back at the hotel yet cause the map shows we're at this store. We're supposed to FaceTime with them in 10 minutes. The men kind of look around and tell us we can have tea in less than that amount of time. I keep insisting that my parents are freaking out because they can tell we're in the carpet store and not the hotel and that they will likely contact the embassy if we don't get going. They continued blocking the staircase. I told them that we would come for tea in the morning as I still really wanted a carpet and that we needed to get out of the store and back to FaceTime. It took a little persuading but they eventually opened a path for us to go to the door. One of them followed us back to the square insisting that we come back and see them. Of course, we didn't. I have no idea if they were completely harmless or not but I had never had such an overwhelming feeling. They easily could have drugged us, placed us in carpets, and taken us out. My parents didn't actually have our location as my phone was on airplane mode, so who actually knows? On the other hand, I might have been paranoid, but it wasn't a situation I ever wanted to be in again. Once we were back at the hotel, she told me she was really scared too but that she thought I was fine so she went with it. My dad had to go to court to settle a way overdue payment for the place he worked at. He was going to take me with him so I can be more exposed to the adult world so to speak. However, that meant he would have to leave the office back door unlocked so the rest of the staff could clock in. He suddenly didn't feel right about it and decided to have me man the office instead. He got T-boned outside the courthouse on the passenger side of the car that day. The car was totaled and I would have gotten severely hurt if I was there. Bro, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.